everyone. Starting immediately to my right here, we set, not in the order of my sheet, so give me a second here. We have Tyler Thoreson. He is the main man in editorial, creative, and customer experience at GILT. To Tyler's right, we have Jeff Rader of Harry's, Warby Parker, you name it, he co-founded it. And then we have Andy Spade. He's the co-founder of Jack Spade, Kate Spade and Partners, and Spade, a storefront and studio producing content, as well as serving as an agency for top brands. Then to his right, we have Michael Preysman, the founder and CEO of Everlane, providing transparency and great design in well-priced, direct-to-consumer apparel. And finally, we have Emmett Shine, founded Gin Lane Media, a digital creative agency working with content creators and brands such as J. Crew, Opening Ceremony, and Stella McCartney. Okay. So, I want to start with a sort of a top-line question, kind of about why we're here in the first place. Coming from Forbes, I have to represent the viewpoint of capitalism at all times. And one of the foundational tenets of capitalism is the specialization of labor. The idea that you should do the thing that you're best at and then pay someone else to do the thing that you're not best at. But we're here to talk about this idea that content and commerce are chocolate and peanut butter. Everybody is suddenly saying that they're better done together than apart. Why is that the thinking now? Why is that where everybody seems to think the money is? I'd be happy to hear from any of you on this, but Tyler, since you've worked both sides of the divide, I'd be especially interested. And since I promised I wouldn't start with you.
Okay, well thanks. Yeah, that's so much for that agreement we made off before we started. Well, I think, let's be honest, part of it's just that second revenue stream that ad-supported media, or third, or whatever. If you've got ads and you've got subscriptions, then retail and e-commerce is an attractive revenue stream to look at. And I also think the internet and e-commerce has just opened up opportunities both for publishers to add an e-commerce element, but also of course for folks like us at GILT to publish content. We really look at it, it's all about defining your goal with us at GILT. It's less for us about driving inbound traffic and sort of growing our member base. It's up to, I think, 8 million now, and it's more about conversion and sort of inspiring our guy to kind of try new things. So that's the way we look at it on our side. We do, I think from sort of in terms of like where you want to approach this, if you want to be successful in this space, in bringing content into a commerce perspective, you really have to, narrow your goals and really focus on, sort of define your goals clearly. And I think for us, what we found is focusing on conversion. In a real technical way. So I can get more into that, but I want to hear more from these guys.
Oh, I can respond. I think it's always been that way. I mean, I would say if you look at editorial, over the years, they've always helped sell product. They weren't making revenue off it, but they were helping others make revenue. The same in television and in film. Product placement has been in existence for many years, and we've always known on the commerce side that a great way to sell your product is to get it editorialized, right, or to get it into a movie or on television. What's happened lately though is that with technology, I'm kind of surprised that more magazines and television production companies haven't started their own retail divisions or commerce divisions. I saw a show called The Shed on reality TV the other day, and I honestly thought it was made up by the producers to sell merchandise from The Shed. And I thought, what a brilliant idea. I'm going to create a show about this restaurant, like Bubba Shrimp, and I'm going to make it up, and then I'm going to sell t-shirts online and tons of product. There's a big business in it, so I think it's just evolved.
I think what these two guys are doing is sort of, they're starting by developing a product they believe in, both on Everlane and Harry's, and sort of then saying, all right, how do we make this relevant? How do we tell that story? And I think that's really, the key for us is like, when you talk about whether or not they created that show, like to actually, sell things, or like, let's buy all this stuff and let's create a show to sell it. I mean, that's essentially, what we're doing. People talk a lot about credibility then, right? It's like, well, how do you trust, what you guys are saying, and I feel like, well, we bought it. Like, we invested in this stuff, and I feel like that's an argument that Jeremy Langmead, the editor-in-chief of Mr. Porter, made. I think it was like in the business of fashion or something, and that was really impressive. Like, you know, in a magazine context, there's a lot of reasons you choose one thing or another. You know, in retail, like we're actually positioning something, or whether it's Everlane or Harry's, like we're actually saying, hey, we believe in this stuff. We invested in it 9 months ago, you know. We invested in shooting it, now we're gonna tell you how to wear it, we're gonna make it really attractive to you, and we're hopefully gonna do it in a way that's kind of cool and engaging and make it look fun. And so I feel like from that perspective, you know, the idea of like, can I trust your judgment? Can I trust the advice you're giving? Like, I think the proof is in the pudding, the fact that we just kind of went and bought this product. So, you know, that's kind of covered, which is cool.
So that raises a good question. In this convergence, it seems like maybe for retailers that the path is a little shorter and smoother to content than it is in the other direction. That for content producers, for publishers, that they're making this transition, this reinvention of themselves more out of necessity than out of kind of an opportunity that, you know, big fat dangling opportunity in front of them. Does anybody have a take on that? Is it easy for retailers?
Well, I just think that, I think it is easier in that, you know, the way that you run a retail business, the way that you manufacture it, and that process. I'm not saying it's easier than doing editorial. I've done both on several occasions. It's just a whole different skill set, and it's a different team, and they both are. But, you know, Monocle has tried to do this for a while. I don't think that it will ever be big. I think it's a really brilliant idea to do it. But, I mean, you really have to, you know, support it. You have to have equal attention. We just launched a brand out of our advertising studio called Sleepy Jones, but we are developing a huge team that represents half of the staff of our agency / you know, branding studio, and you really have to dedicate time to it. I've seen a lot of people on the content side try to launch, you know, commerce and vice versa, but I don't know if anyone else has any ideas about this. I just think your skill sets are different.
Yeah, I think it's I think for a brand it's sometimes just very natural to develop compelling content because, to Tyler's point, we invested in it ourselves, we believe it, and we want to tell that story to customers, and it really helps to deepen the relationship that we have with customers from the moment that they interact with the brand sort of through their journey. On the content side, I agree with Andy. I think it's really important to invest. And I think vice versa. I think lots of brands and companies get in trouble when they, or just don't do things that are compelling when they just kind of go halfway. Tons of brands have launched blogs, and it's like, yeah, I've got a blog, it's cool, here's a bunch of content, but it's not necessarily as thoughtful as the rest of the brand. And so I think it's really important when you develop content just to be very clear about what the content is, how it reinforces the brand message, and then to really deeply invest behind it.
So how do you know if the content you're doing is good? And is your measuring stick conversion, or if your conversion into sales, or if your consumers are enjoying it, but it's not necessarily inspiring them to reach for their wallets, is it good content?
I think it's a really good question. I'm interested in some other folks' opinions, but the way that we think about it at Harry's and at Warby Parker is there are some things that are highly measurable. And by running a business where we sell the majority of our product online, you can measure results incredibly quickly. We can serve 2 images and see which image people respond better to very quickly. I think, though, that there are things that we do that are sometimes just because we have a vision around them for the brand, and we think that they are going to help us to further define the brand. And those are very hard things to sort of quantify. And lots of times we just talk about building a brand that's bigger than the business, and one that's going to last for a long time. And sometimes in those instances, you have to have a vision for that brand, a long-term vision, and just make decisions to develop, you know, content for the brand, or make strategic choices for the brand that may not manifest themselves in immediate results.
I do think it's true that you have a vision. I would say that even when you do, though, you can still measure pretty well. So we do, let's say our brand is about transparency, and we'll push out content around infographics around the cost, and we'll push out other types of stories. And you can just generally tell when people engage with the content because you see more traffic to the site, you see people talking about it on social media, and then you sort of guide your strategy a bit more towards that type of content. So you'll have an initial I think the way that we think about it internally is we have an initial vision, and then we use some level of data or engagement to guide us in the right direction over time. And that's just an iterative process over and over and over again.
Completely, and I think that makes sense around focus, but probably also always want to have a cohesive brand story.
For sure.
So there may be some elements that people aren't engaging with, but it helps you tell that story. That's
totally agree.
And I think there's one other point. When we were launching our first brand, Kate, we talked about, you know, being a handbag company, but we knew in the back of our minds that we were creating a world that would give us permission to go into other categories. We weren't just a handbag company. And we always talked about brands like Furla, and Furla's advertising was always a photograph of a Furla bag. And Furla has yet to have a fragrance deal. And I think there's a reason for it. We created an entire world around our brand, and we told our story. It was about this person and how they lived and what they liked. And before we had e-commerce, we would tell that story in our retail environment too. We had a little section that said, things Kate likes. And so we started just having a dialogue and a relationship with customers, what kind of car we like, what kind of cocktail we like, what kind of, you know, house we live in, all these different things. And I think with, like Warby and Harry's is, the customer has to see that. We didn't get direct, you know, investment back from that, but over time, they allowed us to go into shoes. They allowed us to go into hats. They allowed us to go into fragrance. They allowed us to go into home. And all those little cues that we kind of put forth to the consumer kind of educated the consumer and made them understand that we were actually bigger than just a handbag.
From a brand level, it's sort of a cohesive story across the entire product set from men to women, and you're building a lifestyle for, you know, basically at the end of the day, what are your values and what do you believe in? And then people sort of attribute themselves to those values and say, hey, that's the life I want to live. And then, you know, there's a story behind the product that they buy into.
Sorry, Emmett.
Yeah, I think a common thread is context. And I think that's like another C, I'll try to speak into this, that's important in terms of what we're really kind of talking about. And the brands and the work that these guys do is, as you were giving an analogy with Kate Spade stuff, you contextualized kind of more the ethos of what it was about, which makes it easier to get into another vertical or whatever. It's about narratives, it's storytelling, and I think the content really begets that, it helps that. It makes it so that it's easier for someone to contextually understand what they're looking at, what a brand's about, and what they can do, versus like, here's a mannequin and here's a shirt on a mannequin. There's no context, you know, and that's, I guess, a similar word kind of for like the content that's being created contextualizes what the brand is about and what the experience is. So I think if you're working on a brand or you're working with the brand, you want to really understand the root of what that brand is about, or, you know, so you can give the kind of narrative or the context. I think that dialogue is really important.
Yeah, and on the context side, I mean, I think a brilliant example is what the Partners in Spade guys did with Sleepy Jones and the manifesto that they wrote about just wanting to wake up and lounge in your PJs all day. And it just sort of gave a product that was otherwise I'd always thought of a fairly basic product some meaning. I was like, cool, these are my boxers that I'm just going to hang out in like on a Saturday for a few hours. And I think that actually like it just created a lifestyle and experience around a product that I otherwise maybe wouldn't have imagined. So.
And I think to that point, when we launched, and we just launched about 4 months ago, Sleepy Jones, we thought about categories. You know, I'd worked in accessories for so many years, and I saw this category that's been around for, you know, obviously hundreds of years. You know, you think about men's boxers, women's underwear, I would say. Is that the way to pronounce it? And pajamas and loungewear, and that lifestyle right now. Everyone's so busy and everyone's working so hard, and tech is so, we just did a t-shirt that just says, fuck tech. And the idea is that, you know, sit back, ponder, stare at the ceiling, you know, keep a notebook by your bed, make notes. The best ideas come when you're comfortable, not in three-piece suits. How many brilliant ideas I'm sure a lot have, actually. But anyway, I think we were looking for a point of view, and then obviously the product's most important, but we wanted to have a point of view about what's going on in society and culturally and what people are feeling right now, and have them identify with something that we believe is something we believe in.
I got to say, it's like fun listening to you guys because you're all individual brands, or so to speak, or the Partners in Spade hat or Gin Lane, like you're generally working with like a single vertical brand. And like, you know, we're a multi-brand retailer, and that's like a, you know, I see Eric, you know, from Saxony. I mean, that's a totally different situation where you're bringing together all these other brands and you're trying to layer what your brand means on top of that. And, you know, when I look at Harry's or Warby or Everlane and like what you guys have been able to do to tell the story of your product and build your brand, it's like, oh yeah, that's awesome. I could totally do that. Now, we can't do that with the hundreds and hundreds or thousands of brands that we work with. So, you know, it's a different proposition. But the ideal, I think, for a retailer is if, you know, the fact that you bought that product from that retailer adds some value to it somehow. Like it makes it that much cooler that I bought it here. You know, and I think that's kind of that magic that you know, that you're trying to cultivate. On a completely unrelated note, I gotta say, coming from, you know, a click-based, ad-based situation and moving into GILT, and I've been at GILT for like a little over 3 years now, man, I have a newfound respect for the difference between getting somebody to click on something and getting somebody to buy something. Because let me tell you, it's a little easier to get somebody to click on something and get those impressions up than it is to actually get somebody to buy something.
So what's the secret? What takes place in between those two moments?
Well, I think you can track both, and you can certainly track, you know, conversion and sales. And it's really important to do that. But I think to do content, and what I like to say is I look at it more like an editorial approach. It's not just about content being this sort of, you know, a lot of people look at it as some fairy dust we're just going to sprinkle in this real kind of corporate mindset, like, oh, we got a budget for content. Let's just chuck a little content over there, and that'll help that. You know, so it's either that or, you know, or it just becomes this commodity. It's like, I don't know, can you get some guy to do some content in there? What are we going to put in this space? You know, when you look at a wireframe, it's like, oh, this is where the content goes. Right. And I'm like, oh, that's going to work. We
have to populate these modules.
Right, yeah. And I'm like, okay, that's maybe not the right approach. Yeah. So what is the secret? I mean, I think it's, you know, starting from the proposition that like selling something isn't an inherently inauthentic experience. Like you can actually, you know, people think just because you're selling something that they're somehow pulling one over on somebody. Like no, you can do that in a very straight ahead, honest way. And so
in a way, it's more authentic than some of the transactions that take place in a pure play content environment.
Yeah, it could be.
Your motives are on the table.
For sure, for sure.
A while ago, the Gin Lane guys shared with our team at Harry's, this was in the context of building our site at Harry's and trying to tell our brand story and create content around the brand that would help people to understand the brand and then hopefully eventually want to buy the product. This article that was written about the fact that e-commerce was kind of bringing people back to an old school store experience where you'd walk in to a store where someone sold a bar of soap, and the guy would know your name and he'd know what soap was right for you, and you could have an honest conversation with him about a set of products. He'd help you make an intelligent choice, and then you'd walk out. And I think in some ways, if you are effective in e-commerce, you're able to get to know people, tell them really compelling brand stories, follow up with them personally. So at Harry's, for instance, we email all of our customers after they buy and just say, hey, we're here for you, we love you, we want to get to know you and help you make good choices. And in doing that, you can build a trusting relationship with them, which then in turn just makes them feel more comfortable buying product from you. Now, I think the next level of complexity there, and I think that's something that Michael and Everlane team have done an amazing job of, is figuring out how to sort of position that content in the right way on a website to, or in sort of a purchase flow to get someone to do it in the optimal fashion. You know, like where do I put this to catch your eye such that you want to read the story and understand it? But I think that's fundamentally what everyone is really going for. It's to use it to make the experience feel authentic, not the other way around.
Yeah, Andy has something to say, but I'm interested in hearing more about that.
Oh, I can say?
Yeah, please.
Okay, please. Thank you. I think when I first started, I actually started advertising, but I moved to New York in 1987, and I discovered Paul Smith, and all of you, I'm sure, know Paul Smith. And he was the one who really taught me about content and in a retail environment. To Tyler's point, you know, he sold Japanese robots, you know, he sold books by, you know, unknown authors, unknown photographers, He sold, old typewriters, vintage cameras, Japanese ephemera, and everything was for sale. It was very honest. It actually contextualized his brand. I would go in constantly to see what he was interested in personally. I can't even fit into the clothing. I don't think I own any of the clothing, maybe a pair of shoes, but I would visit that store every week to see what he had discovered in his travels. And that taught me that, when we moved into this space where online we're putting content in, it's really, he had a specific voice. I liked what he liked. I identified with whatever he was curious, about. But you're right, like, it doesn't have to be content for content's sake. You can sell it, and that's honest. And, great retailers know that. Now, as we know, what's happened is the reverse. In the beginning, we started our website and said, can it reflect our, the really interesting retail environment that we had in Jack Spade and Kate Spade? God, that's going to be hard to do. Now it's reversed. Now our partners and I are trying to figure out how do we make the retail space as interesting as what's happening online right now, because there's so many different places you can go and things you can do, and it moves so quickly.
It's actually interesting when you think about a physical store, right? You have that opportunity to build a real space and to create that world. Online, it's much harder, right? Because you don't have the walls, you don't have all this space. When people come to an online store, they want to shop. And so for us, we actually separate those two experiences out. And so the equivalent of Paul Smith is our blog. It's the social media stuff that you do. And that's where you create the brand persona. People say, hey, I follow you because I want to be attached to the brand. And then when they go into shopping mode, we used to try to put some of that content in there, but we've pulled it all out because we found through our studies that people, when they shop, they just want to shop, at least online. And so we take all of that out and we only put product-focused content. So you get on the product page and then we try to put as much content as possible because that's where people spend all their time, is on the product page. And so you have your world, which is social media, and then you have your product-focused content, and that's shopping mode, and that's what we do.
Jeff, is that what you were driving at with where in the flow the content?
Yeah, I think that's
belongs?
right. I think the other thing is that the product content can sometimes be the most compelling content, because you tell this product story, about the fact that you have a very different model in retail and that you're, sourcing, like the Everland stories are great, right? Like this specific product came from this specific place.
Our content is easy because it's about our product,
exactly.
So it's like we don't have to do anything.
But I think it reinforces the brand message, builds trust, and then so I think sometimes that content gets overlooked, but those stories on the product pages, I think, are some of the most important around.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's something that editorially magazines have known for a long time, right? Those pages, people just love to flip through product pages.
For sure. And, I think that's, the key is that you have to put yourself, I come from an editorial background, like my instinct is I want to write something, I want to package something up, but you have to start from the premise of what's the person coming to the site looking for? If I'm looking to buy something, I don't want something in the way. And so from our perspective, on GILT Man, we'll do a sale. We do have a bunch of different brands. If we're doing a trend sale, we're doing something that's going up at noon today that's sort of our fall kind of get the look series, and it's a trend series, and it's all about kind of old school style and a fresh take. And what we like to do in those situations is we'll present the trend, we'll present the look, we'll kind of show you, hey, here's what we think, here's our point of view. And we think that's going to get you in the door. We think that's going to get you to click and get intrigued. But then it's about, you decide, you take the reins from there. And I feel like I'm speaking from the men's experience in particular. We find that's really compelling. Guys, they want to feel like they can own the sort of process, right? You want to give them a sense of you're not just leading them by the nape. It's so the idea of shop the look, you can go too far in that direction, and you need to give guys options. Now you look at the site today, and the sale we're doing is the most shop the look sale we ever do. But oftentimes that's sort of what we try to do. We say here's 3 ways to make this look your own, and we're just going to give a bunch of really cool product beneath it, and you take it from there. So we're going to get out of the way. I think that really works for us.
So you're saying women like to be led by the nape?
Exactly. I'm saying men, just get this down, everybody. Men are, no, I'm not. I'm saying that I can only speak from the men's perspective. Yeah. I do feel like, to this product page discussion, men like to research their purchases and sort of circle around something a little bit more. It's either an impulse, which obviously it's GILT, it's fast, it's got to move faster, it's gone. But then there's also a lot of high-end stuff that we sell, and I feel like, we're hitting you every day with that email, with that mobile alert. People, they have plenty of opportunity to interact with GILT. What we try to do is a little bit of that Paul Smith kind of attitude, a little bit of that perspective and point of view that we know that, you may not be in the market for a suit right now, but we're top of mind. Oh, when I need this, I'm going to come to you guys because I kind of like your general perspective on things. And I think that's what Paul Smith can do when he's doing all the robots and the curated books and the ephemera. You know, his business is like, God, I need a really cool pair of socks. I'm going to go to that guy with the robots, you know, and I feel like there's something, you know, there's something to that. It's just, you can't really track the value. The tricky part is tracking the value of that, and I don't want to hog the mic here. But that my boss is like, it's amazing because we worked together for a year now, and he comes from the analytical numbers side, and now he calls the editorial stuff that we do our secret sauce. And, you know, and it's working for us. So I think we've got it down to a good place.
Yeah, I'll just add one quick thing. That is one big portion of, or one big aspect of content is to sort of create the story and be top of mind with people. And we've seen with Everlane, people have followed us for 16 months, and they say, oh, I finally just bought that. And so you're just there, you're there, you're there, and then finally, for some reason, you do one thing and it pulls the trigger and they go and become a customer. And so that is the other big aspect of content, is just always being top of mind and just making, just being available for them.
I'm interested, we're going to take questions from the audience in a minute, but I'm interested in just hearing anyone else's thoughts about what is unique or different about the way that, the way that you have to sort of speak to men in particular with your content, your commerce-driven content, or your content-driven commerce.
I think, as you said, men don't like being kind of told what to do to a certain extent. I think they like having the tools kind of presented and then being able to work with what's there and make their own kind of decisions. I just wanted to go back to one point, I think, with Harry's and Warby and Everlane. There's a lot of content which is created in telling the narratives of the product. And that's one thing we worked a lot on with Harry's, is there's not a lot of SKUs, but it's, it's low in the amount, but very high in kind of the narrative for it. So, and Everlane also, there's a lot of like infographics and information and like the product photography in the narrative. You have per se like a longer scroll. So I think, again, it comes back to we have the brick and mortar kind of analogy of a store, and stores have been existing for hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years. Online stores have not. So it's very new, and people are trying to figure out how to contextualize the experience so that you don't go just to, a white page and you're skewed off to the, mannequin thing with information on the right. I don't know how to do anything unless I understand what the hell is going on. So when I go to shop online, it's very different than going into a Soho store and the smell, there's someone to talk to, there's music playing, the street. There's a whole ambiance that you buy into. It's not always just the fabric count of why you get a shirt. You're buying into a lifestyle, an association, a narrative. And so when you're online, if there isn't a narrative, what's the point? It's not, as you said, as click-driven. It's the customer is getting smarter, and I think the two have to play with each other, which is a big conversation that we're focused on, is taking that which digital offers and putting it into brick and mortar, because there's a lot of quantifiable intelligence that can go qualitatively make sense, and then the qualitative of which the brick and mortar wonderful kind of world experience offers, you can pull in for web. So it's contextual, and I think, just to not ramble, I think women like to, as they say, kind of treasure hunt, a little bit of the mix and match and save something here and put into a cart and come back to look at it later. And I think men, to stereotype, they are more driven in knowing what they kind of want to find, and then they want the assisting information from an expert, or have the ability to contextualize how it can make sense but still feel kind of in control.
Do you think that brick and mortar retailers, or brick and mortar, nobody's a brick and mortar retailer anymore, but do you think brick and mortar native retailers have learned a lot from digital native retailers in terms of this need to contextualize and build some story?
I think a good takeaway with like your quote unquote disruptive tech brands like a Warby per se is, or Everlane, it's, as they've been mentioning, it's very quantifiable. You really have access to information and numbers. And that's one thing. It's like, think of like Google kind of overview for analytics for a site. It's very easy to see, oh, well, this page got this click through and this didn't. Here's my basic A/B testing. It's a little bit more difficult in your mom and pop store to kind of do that if, say Joe, who runs a counter, is sick for 4 weeks or whatever, and he calls up Tom and says, hey, Tom, like, how are the metrics looking for the conversions for walking in? It's like, Tuesday seemed kind of busy. So I think that's an important part that you can take into brick and mortar is matching the qualitative of like, you know, well, Joe said he really liked the sandwich that he made for him or whatever, and then the quantitative of saying, well, it looks like, you know, on Tuesday when it rained, you know, traffic increased, you know, by 20%, and in the back of the store there, we're really not seeing anyone touch those pants, and then these things are flying off the shelf for some reason, so you can analyze that information. So I think that's something that like is going into quote unquote brick and mortar.
One other just thing on that, so I completely agree that the way that Emmett contextualized this, and we've kind of all talked about this, which is our challenge in a digital world is to create the ambiance of a store online. And I think one thing that we spent a lot of time with Jinleen talking about in the context of Harry's was the fact that web pages are not static, and that I think the advantage that we have in a digital world is the ability to create dynamic content and serve it to people in interesting ways. So you don't have to just see a story written on a page. Like, you know, our product pages in Harry's, you can spin our razors and actually interact with them. Like as you scroll down the pages, different interactive elements happen, they catch your eye, and I think they help to sort of reinforce the fact that you were an innovative brand doing innovative things online, and also just the digital format is, I think, getting more and more compelling just around storytelling than it was previously.
Couple minutes, and if we have any questions out in the audience, and we do right there.
Hey there. Kind of the bigger conceptual thing that I'm noticing here is as either an editorial or trying to sell with any of your content, you're just trying to build trust with whoever it is. So if you're partners in Spade and you come out with a new product, I trust you already. So that makes it easier for me to do that. So when your content matches up with your product, whatever it is, which then goes back to the brick and mortar old store, like if I go into a store down the block from me, I want to trust that that guy's not going to rip me off, that he's offering the best product, all that stuff. And you're just trying to emulate that online the best way that you absolutely can. That's all. Just a comment.
The only thing I would add to that is we try to build trust and we try to create stories that are shareable. So even though we're building trust, we want that story to be interesting enough that somebody goes and tells 5 friends. Right. So it's both those at the same time.
But that's also, again, a very, you know, thousands of years thing, which is just regular word of mouth.
Yeah, I think he started it off saying
it
hasn't really changed. It's the same as it was 100 years ago.
We have one right down front.
Hey guys, I'm curious to know how, since we're at a tech and tastemaker conference, how tastemakers have sort of affected businesses today and how they interact with, I guess, creating content. And because often you find a lot of brands reaching out to tastemakers and quote unquote influencers to sort of like create these content stories or these contextual stories for them. So I'm just curious to hear from you guys how you guys kind of separate that.
So I think the way that we sometimes think about the best way for someone to learn about our brand, Harry's or B. Parker, is through a credible source. And that's why we focused a lot early on editorial content, because, you know, publications like Details are credible sources for lots of people to just learn about brands, and people trust what they say. And so when we think about tastemakers or influencers, I think what we really want to do is find people who are credible in helping us to tell our brand story, and then have them sort of have a conversation with potential customers as if they were friends almost telling that story. And I think that goes back to what Michael said about creating content that's shareable. If the most credible source that I have for someone to tell me about a product is a friend of mine who I trust. And so to the extent that we can sort of create that relationship between an influencer and our customers, that's great. And then to the extent that we can create content that's shareable among lots of people, then you start to get the brand introduced through lots of different credible sources and reinforced that way. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 different credible sources to get you to actually buy, but I think that's how we've thought about using people like that.
Go ahead, Andy. I was just going to say very quickly, what I love about the digital space and crowdsourcing is how quickly it allows people to sniff through the bullshit. Because it's like, oh, trust is important. How do we co-opt that? You know, how do we engineer trust? You know, or you know, the old saying about sincerity. You know, if you can fake that, you got it made. So I just feel like there's that whole notion of the real guy. You know, like, oh, this guy's living the lifestyle, et cetera. How do we we're some big corporate entity. How do we tap into that? You know, you can only go so far before that starts to ring a little hollow. You know, but we're actually sending it up a little bit. I see Stephen Rojas back there. we're kind of one of the amazing real guys that everyone wants to photograph right now. We're doing a thing with him in this month. He's Mr. September. We're kind of spoofing of that a little bit, and we're creating a whole social campaign this month about reclaiming September, which I find to be the most underrated month of the year. I'll go to GILT Manual for more on Rojas over there. But and post your September selfie, hashtag September selfie, everyone. Thank you.
Jump to the next one. Yeah.
Well, did you have something to add there?
No.
No. How could you do better than September selfies? Thank you. Thank you all very much. This was great. And everybody, don't forget to get your Fuck Tech t-shirt in the gift bag on the way out.